Welcome in, everyone, to my Week 6 edition of my Fantasy Football Favorites and Fades here on Fantasy Football for the People. If you have not already, please do hit that subscribe button and like and share the video. It really helps me out a ton, especially as I'm starting out my first year here on YouTube. Um, Before we dive into this week's Favorites and Fades list, I always like to go back, look at what I said last week, who I had as favorites and fades, see if they were hits or misses, not just to have accountability for myself, but to also learn from those mistakes or learn from what we got right moving forward into the future. So I'll admit it, last week, my absolute worst week of the season so far. I had tons of misses last week, not a whole lot of hits. When they were hits, they were massive. But unfortunately, there were just too many things that went wrong. So we're going to go back through those and see exactly what we learned from those mistakes. Starting with the favorites, quarterback CJ Stroud I had as a favorite. He finished as the QB 17 overall. That was a miss. Stroud, he had his first down week since the start of the season, and he failed to finish inside the top 15. I'm still very high on him for the rest of the season. This week against New Orleans, not as much. I still don't really think he's a very good streaming option this week. I wouldn't have recommended him moving into this week, even if he had a good week last week. But moving forward, I think we're still going to be able to use him after week 6. Next one, running back Aaron Jones. He did not play at all. That was a total miss on my part. Full disclosure, I write all of the updates for Green Bay Packers players for Rotoballer, and unfortunately, pretty much everything that I was reading from all the beat reporters out of Green Bay that I've followed for the past couple of years, everything was positive up until the day of the game that he was going to play, and then he became inactive. So it was a bit of a surprise, but on my part, I suggested a lot of people play him, and because it was that Monday night matchup, it kind of screwed some people over. Hopefully you were able to get, one of the other running backs that were there in that game, even if you just needed a point, because I know a lot of people said I just need 1 point and Aaron Jones isn't playing. If you picked up, any of those backup running backs, most of them were able to get a point in half PPR formats. So hopefully you were able to do that. Moving on to running back Breece Hall, biggest hit of the week by far for me. RB3, the whole industry called this one, right? This wasn't just me, obviously, but Hall had his doubters. I had plenty of people saying that they still weren't going to start Breece Hall just because he hadn't done it up until that point and they didn't trust the workload. Well, now you can trust the workload. Moving forward, clear workhorse for New York. And Hall is an every week starter regardless of the matchup. He's not going to be a top tier option every single week if the matchup is tough, but he is an every week start moving forward. Next up, wide receiver Michael Pittman. He was a wide receiver 37 last week. That was a miss. Anthony Richardson left the game early, got a shoulder injury, find out that it's an AC joint sprain. He's going to be out for 4 to 8 weeks from everything that has been reported. That's a huge loss for not only him, but the Colts. And to be honest with you, even with the switch, Colts dominated this game on the ground with Zach Moss. Not Jonathan Taylor, but Zach Moss. So there was not a lot of throwing that needed to happen in that game. There are better days ahead for Michael Pittman. We've seen what he's able to do with a high target share there, and Gardner Minshew will still pepper him with targets. So just a bad week this past week for him. Finish outside that top 36. Romeo Doubs, biggest miss of the week by far. I think even bigger than Aaron Jones. Romeo Doubs had 25 targets in 2 games coming into this game, and he finished with 1 catch for 4 yards. No one saw this poor of a performance coming, not just from him, but the Packers offense as a whole, especially against that awful, terrible, just horrible Las Vegas defense. Just didn't work out. This team needs the bye week. They have it this week. They need to figure some stuff out because over the past few weeks, things have been figured out defensively to game plan against Jordan Love and the rest of that offense. And then my final favorite of the week was tight end Zach Ertz. This was a hit. He was the tight end 13, top streaming option of the week, finishing as that tight end 13 right outside the top 12. It was a much lower target share than I expected. I'm not going to lie. I think it was only 4 by the end of the week, but he found the end zone, made it up for it, and you're going to continue to see him get high target shares depending on the matchup. This is another good week to play him, in my opinion. The Rams are just terrible against tight ends. So moving on to the fades, quarterback Russell Wilson. He was the QB 13, finished outside that top 12. I'm still going to consider it a miss. He wasn't a world beater by any means, but he still finished as a top tier streaming option. And to me, that's a miss because I try to give options that you're going to be streaming good or bad, in my favorites and fades. So that way you know what to do with them. And he finished as a top streamer. So I'm not going to consider that a hit. Ramondre Stevenson, massive hit. RB49, his struggles continued through week 5. He recorded just 8 total touches last week. I still believe that better days are ahead. I recommended trading for him last week once this past week was over because I knew he was going to have a bad game against New Orleans. I still think you do it. Go grab him. He's as cheap as he's ever going to get. He's got a really good schedule coming up. Bet on the talent that it's going to change. Bet on the offense changing because this offense has been absolutely terrible, and they're going to need to figure things out. They were winning last season, especially when they were using a heavy dose of Ramondre. Hopefully they shift back to that. Tyler Algier, he was the RB33. That's a hit in my opinion. He got 17 opportunities. That was way more than I thought. He had more opportunities, more carries than Bijan Robinson did last week, and he turned that into less than 5 points in standard formats. So he's no longer startable. He's no longer flexible. This matchup last week was phenomenal for him, and he still couldn't get it done with 17 opportunities. That's just a big problem for him. He's a handcuff, the elite handcuff of all handcuffs, but he is a handcuff moving forward. George Pickens, big miss, wide receiver 4 on the week. I couldn't have been more wrong here. I'll apologize for it. Everything that I had seen up to that point, they hadn't been using him. The Steelers offense was terrible. And when he did have his big week, it was on one catch. That was not the case this past week. They finally got him as heavily involved as they possibly could, and they won their matchup against Baltimore. So hopefully they continue to do this. I hope that they continue to unleash Pickens. I just have a little bit of hesitation that they're going to do this on a weekly basis. Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver 34, that's a hit as well. Plenty of waiver options or bench players that finished higher than Jeudy last week. He really didn't have that great of a game. There was a lot of wide receivers that finished outside that top 30 that should have been able to finish inside of it and were started in pretty much all leagues. He just didn't get it done. He might be traded. It's bench Jerry Jeudy or bust at this point because there's a horrible string of matchups coming up for the Broncos wide receiver core in general for fantasy purposes, and he's just not getting it done even in good ones. So we're going to stay away from him if possible. And then my final one, Kyle Pitts. He was the tight end 9 last week, even after scoring a touchdown. It sounds like my rant, hopefully it was heard by Arthur Smith. Obviously not. I'm not popular enough for that type of stuff, obviously. Joking aside. I don't see this performance as the new norm, if you will. This is not something that I'm expecting from Kyle Pitts every single week. He's still in a timeshare with Jonnu Smith. Good game for Pitts. I'm happy for him. I'm happy he finally got the targets that he deserves as a player because he's the most talented on that roster by a wide margin. But I can't expect this to happen every single week. So that was 6 out of 13. Really bad week. We're going to rebound this week with some of the great options that I have for you. So let's dive right into my first favorite of the week. Quarterback Matthew Stafford versus Atlanta. Stafford has not been the greatest fantasy option through 5 weeks. He's thrown the ball at a high rate, but the touchdowns just haven't really been there for him. The run game has taken most of the touchdowns, especially when they get down close in scoring range, inside the 5 to 10 yard line. They're using Kyron Williams as the goal line back, and he's finding a way into the end zone. I think that shifts a bit this week playing against the Cardinals. Stafford had his full complement of wide receivers last week, and now that Cooper Kupp is back at 100%, he had a phenomenal game. And the pass catchers had a phenomenal game. Arizona gives up the 4th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks so far this season, and they've allowed the 4th most passing yards to quarterbacks, not to mention a 72% completion rate when targeting wide receivers. Stafford should put up great yardage totals this week, and he has a good shot to score multiple touchdowns for the first time this season. So if you need a streamer, Matthew Stafford is my top one of the week. Let's go to the running back position. We have Alvin Kamara at Houston. I'm going to admit I was not the biggest Kamara supporter throughout the offseason, and I'm still really not the biggest Kamara supporter. He has been super inefficient since he has come back. His value was a bit inflated in that first week back because he had 13 targets from a noodle-armed Derek Carr, and I think he gained not even 35 yards on 13 targets, which is absolutely insane. It shows you how bad efficiently he has been. However, this is the matchup that you want to start him in against Houston. Houston They're allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to running backs this year. They've given up the 6th most receiving yards to that position as well. That plays right into Kamara's hands, especially while Derek Carr is getting healthier. He's still not at 100%. He's still going to look to check down on a consistent basis. That's going to only play to Kamara's strengths as well. They've allowed also the 4th most rushing touchdowns through 5 weeks. So this is a great matchup for Kamara to be started in. You can count on him as a high-end RB2 with top 12 upside. And Kendre Miller was getting some work last week. So if you're really desperate and you need another player to use as a flex, obviously if you don't have Kamara, but you have Kendre Miller sitting on the bench and you're desperate because of bye weeks, Kendre Miller is another good start as well. So make sure you look that way. Start your running backs against Houston, but Kamara is a great play this week. Let's move on to James Cook versus the Giants. I had Cook on here a few weeks ago when he finished as a top-tier RB2, and that was when he logged his lowest snap share of the season. So he was super efficient, playing well. People are starting to panic, though, on him. He's the RB16 overall this year. He had -4 rushing yards last week against the Jaguars, and he saw just 5 carries. So people are in absolute full panic, benching him for different options. Don't do that. There is no need to freak out. Cook is the clear top back in Buffalo, and he should bounce back in a big way this week against a terrible Giants run defense. New York gives up the 4th most fantasy points per game to the running back position. They've given up the 2nd most yards and the 3rd most rushing touchdowns. Buffalo lost last week, relying too heavily on Josh Allen, throwing, running the whole 9, and that was a massacre game for them in terms of injuries as well. I think they're going to shift back to the run game this week with James Cook. And this is most likely going to be a blowout of the Giants. The Giants are banged up on both sides of the ball heavily. Tons of missing pieces, tons of missing starters. I would fire up James Cook. The game script makes sense. The matchup is perfect. He is a talented back. He's going to bounce back. This is the type of matchup to do it. Play James Cook if you have James Cook. Let's go to the wide receiver position. We got Adam Thielen at Miami. Old man Thielen has definitely proven his doubters wrong this season, and I'm one of them. I wasn't very high on him coming into the year, but he has totally proven me wrong. He's currently ranked as the wide receiver 10 overall through 5 weeks, and he has been the clear top target no matter who is under center for the Panthers. Both Andy Dalton and rookie Bryce Young have started, and they have both heavily targeted Adam Thielen. Bryce Young is struggling. There's no doubt about it. He started to get a little bit better last week, but regardless of his struggles, Thielen has been producing on a consistent basis, and he even did it last week in a really tough matchup against Detroit, who has overall been top 15 against all fantasy positions: quarterback, running back, tight end, wide receiver. So now he gets to play against the Dolphins, who have given up the 12th most yards to wide receivers this season and the 7th most receptions. That plays right into his hands. He is a possession receiver. They will heavily pepper him with targets again. It is tough to predict when Thielen's going to score this year. Carolina's not scoring very much, so that kind of does cap his upside. However, because he is getting so many targets and he's catching most of those targets, he is an easy wide receiver too. And in a matchup like this, he has top 15 upside. So make sure that you have him in your lineups. There's no reason to bench Thielen. This is the type of matchup that you want to smash and play him in. Next set of wide receivers that are my favorites: Jordan Addison and KJ Osborn at Chicago. Losing Justin Jefferson not only hurts his fantasy managers, but it just makes things less fun for fantasy. I have a ton of Justin Jefferson. I can tell you firsthand, I'm struggling over here. But in those leagues, I have managed to either trade for Jordan Addison or I've had KJ Osborn on my bench because I was a big proponent of drafting him this year. There are a few players that are going to benefit. Not just these guys. TJ Hawkinson is going to benefit. Maybe the target share for Alexander Madison goes up. They have Powell as well as their wide receiver 3. He's got some explosive tendencies. But the 2 guys that you're looking to start are Addison and KJ Osborn. While the Bears offense has seemed to kind of figure things out over the past few weeks, their defense is still one of the absolute worst in the league. They allow the 10th most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position this year, and they are tied for the 3rd most touchdowns allowed. Hawkinson's going to get his targets as well. But the duo of Addison and Osborn will be weekly options, weekly startable options moving forward. Addison is the more valuable one. Osborn is the weekly flex, especially in good matchups. and this is what you're going to want to do moving forward. This offense is on pace to throw nearly 800 times. Start both of these options this week against a really bad Chicago defense. My final favorite of the week is tight end Logan Thomas at Atlanta. Logan Thomas has finished as a top 15 option in 3 or 4 games this season and has been a top 6 option twice. In plus matchups this season, he is absolutely smashing and should be on way more rosters than he is right now. He is available in over 50% of leagues, even after waivers have run through. Thomas now gets to face an Atlanta defense that is tied for the 4th most fantasy points per game allowed to the position through 6 weeks. The Falcons have seen tight ends targeted against them the 3rd most times this season, and is going to struggle to stop Thomas this week. With so many disappointments at the tight end position this year, Thomas is a lone bright spot that can be relied upon in a good matchup like this one. So start him if you are getting nothing out of your current tight end position. He is the best streamer available this week. Let's go to the fades. Quarterback, Derek Carr at Houston. Not a lot of people aren't playing Derek Carr. This is also a two QB league type of fade for me. But bye weeks are in full swing, and many are looking at the Saints after their 34-0 win over the Patriots last week. And they're starting as many pieces as they can against Houston, who are still perceived to be a bad team and a bad defense. That's not the case. Houston is middle of the pack against fantasy quarterbacks this year. They have allowed just 3 total passing touchdowns, and they are struggling more against rushing quarterbacks than they are against pocket passers, which Carr is. So now he's playing through the AC joint sprain still. He's getting healthier, especially compared to all reports that have been coming out over the past week. I'm still not buying it. He still doesn't look like he can throw more than 15 yards down the field. This is going to be a lot of short targets, run the ball against Houston, where they really struggle to defend and find a way to keep their offense out of the end zone. So I would find a better option than Carr if you can this week. Stay away from the Saints quarterback and stream somebody else. Go find Matthew Stafford. First running back fade of the week is Jerome Ford versus San Francisco. Jerome Ford has had some solid performances this season and is ranked as the RB21 overall despite being on a bye last week. That's impressive. However, his last outing against Baltimore saw him put up his lowest carry count of the season. He averaged just 2.9 yards per carry, and he finished well outside the top 24 despite having 6 targets in that game, which is a very high number for any running back. San Francisco allows the 7th fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position this year, and they are just shutting ball carriers down altogether. They have a tough time stopping receiving backs. That's one of their weaknesses on defense. However, that's not Ford's forte. You know, he had the 6 targets last week. That was his highest by a wide margin. It was an outlier compared to what he was doing before that this season. Ford is going to have a hard time putting up solid numbers against a defense that's only allowed 2 rushing touchdowns and 3.7 yards per carry through 5 games, especially since Kareem Hunt is going to be working his way more into the offense after the bye that they just had. I would find a different option if possible. Find a way to put Ford onto your bench and get a different option out there this week. Moving on to the Baltimore running backs at Tennessee this week. We have seen this offense ping pong back and forth between Gus Edwards and Justice Hill in terms of both carry count and snap share as the clear lead back in the offense since J.K. Dobbins has been out. Hill seems to be the more reliable option. He also took over in carry count and snap share last week, so he seems to be the number one. But Keaton Mitchell's coming back now as well. They are very excited about the rookie. That's going to make this a full-on RBBC 3-headed monster that you're not going to be able to trust. And you're only going to want to play those options when it's a plus matchup. This week is not that type of matchup. Titans defense is stout against the run, outside of what happened with Zach Moss last week, of course, who has just been absolutely smashing it. We need to let this backfield play out a bit before we are going to confidently start anyone in a really tough matchup like this one against Tennessee. I would go grab Hill and Keaton Mitchell and stash them on your benches. Gus Edwards is fine, but he seems like he's starting to lose his role more and more as the season goes on. But bench all these guys this week if you possibly can. First fade at the wide receiver position this week, DeAndre Hopkins versus Baltimore. D-Hop looked like his old self last week for the first time this year against the Indianapolis Colts pass defense. It was his first finish inside the top 24 all season, and his 11 targets were the second most that he has seen since the start of the season. However, even though he went for over 140 yards last week, I'm avoiding him in this matchup against Baltimore. Ravens had a tough time stopping George Pickens last week. I already made that mistake once. However, the reason they had a tough time stopping Pickens is because of his over-the-top speed and ability to create separation way downfield. That's not happening with D-Hop at this point of his career. He is a possession receiver who racks up fantasy points on high amount of catches. I don't think that's going to happen this week. Hopkins is not the type of player to be able to take the top off of a defense anymore, and Baltimore is just going to double him all game long. With just one good game through 5 weeks, I'm not going to chase points after last week's romping of a terrible Indianapolis pass defense. I would find a way to find him and put him on your bench if possible. Let's go to Joshua Palmer versus Dallas. Coming off of the bye this week, Joshua Palmer is going to be in plenty of lineups due to a multitude of reasons. He's the clear number 2 option behind Keenan Allen over top of rookie Quentin Johnston. And Dallas just got absolutely smoked by the 49ers passing attack, let up 4 touchdowns, couldn't stop anybody on that offense whatsoever. I'm going to look elsewhere if I can for a flex this week. Dallas is still a good defense, and they're going to have a better performance this week. I doubt they're going to have another performance where they just let up 42 points, over 35 points, get absolutely romped, and don't put up any sort of fight offensively. The Chargers defense is terrible. On top of this, Austin Eckler is going to be back this week. He said 99% chance he's going to play. He's had more than enough time to rest that injury that he suffered all the way back at the beginning of the season. Targets are going to go and be converted towards him. And now that they don't have a number 2 option, the caliber of Mike Williams, they're going to look to feed Austin Eckler carries, targets, and everything else, continue to feed Keenan Allen, and then find a way to work the rest of the target share distribution out from there. And I'm not very excited about that in a matchup against Dallas. Find a way to put him on your bench. I know he looks like a good option, especially after what San Francisco did last week. Josh Palmer is not Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, or George Kittle. He's not going to have that much of success against Dallas. Final fade of the week. Tight end Tyler Higbee versus Arizona. Higbee has had a few solid outings this year, has been a good streaming option for the most part. But last week against Philadelphia, he was unable to capitalize on the Eagles defense, who have been allowing top 5 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. He got a massive contract extension. However, he is still dealing with some injury problems, an Achilles injury, strangely, an Achilles injury that has affected him and had him miss practice over the past few weeks. You can tell that he's not at 100%. Cooper Kupp is back. It's distributing the target share in a different way around the offense. He is still the number 4 option behind Tutu Atwell. It's Kupp, Puka, Tutu, and then Tyler Higbee. And against Arizona, who has allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to the tight end position through 5 weeks this season, it's time to let Higbee sit on your bench, look for another option, play the waiver wire, find a tight end in a good matchup, and play him over Tyler Higbee this week. And that's going to do it, ladies and gentlemen, for my week 6 edition of my fantasy football favorites and fades here on fantasyfootballforthepeople.com. You can find me at FFTP on Twitter. You can go find my work on Rotoballer every single week, including the wide receiver injury report that comes out every Saturday at 6:30. We do our 5 p.m. Thursday show for fantasy football Q&As that you can go and check out every single week. That is live. Come into the comments, ask your question. We will answer it for you, me and my brother Matthew. And then any of my work over at Yards Per Fantasy, go check them out as well. I have my TikTok up where this video gets broken down into smaller bite-sized pieces, and you can go and follow that if you want to see those as well. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you later.